I'm Steve Smith, and welcome to A Wired Family. And today we're going to have a webinar. Actually, this is our first webinar that we've done in 2020. And we're going to look at how technology impacts kids and what we as adults, what we as counselors, teachers, administrators, doctors, lawyers, and moms and dads can do to help kids make certain that technology does not keep them from being successful. You know, our goal today, as it is all the time, is to educate students, parents, schools, stakeholders on the actual management of social media and video games and the potential consequences of ignoring what is really a sea change in technology. And I've been around technology all my life. I've never seen technology impact kids the way that it is today, good and bad. You know, perhaps my biggest concern is what we see happening to young kids. And none of this is a result totally of the use of technology, but a good component of it possibly is. For example, back in February, a middle school student in Hillsborough took his own life. Did bullying play a part? This has played out time and time again throughout the Western world, whether it's the United States, Canada, Mexico, Europe, any place where there's a lot of technology that's in the hands of kids. This becomes a potential issue. And today we're going to try to take a look at some of these things to see if we can circumvent those problems. I've written a couple books, most recently, Social Media and the Adolescent Digital Tribe, and then back in 2017, Social Media, Your Child's Digital Tattoo. And the whole focus of both those books is to help parents and anyone that works with kids better understand the good, the bad, and the ugly of technology. And when you talk about the social media and the adolescent digital tribe, we're looking at some of the algorithms that, to a certain extent, drive the behavior of kids. So a lot of things we're going to be talking about today are on our website, awiredfamily.org. So if you're looking at it on a laptop, it will look something like this. If you are like our 60% of the other people, you might be looking at it on your smartphone. It's going to look kind of like this, little different formatting. But every day, or just about every day, we place our content, a lot of content, some of which we've written, some of which we haven't. We'll put it on Facebook, facebook.com/awiredfamily. And we put similar content out on Twitter, and our Twitter handle is @awiredfamily. So today we're going to be looking at 7 different components of technology, or I should say the use of technology by kids, but we're going to be breaking it down into a couple of different, actually we're going to be breaking it down into 4 different sections. So we're going to be looking at apps and problem apps. That's going to be in section 1. We're going to be looking at sexting and judgment, which is going to be in section 2. The impact of porn, and then also privacy will be section 3. And then we're going to be looking at mental health, which is the shortest but perhaps the most important section in this webinar. So when we talk about apps, we're talking about the apps and why we are so distracted by them. Not just us, obviously, but by the kids themselves. And there's a real reason behind that. There's also these problem apps. And a lot of these fly under the radar of parents and adults and school administrators. And they're not necessarily they're not all necessarily apps. Many of them are websites. And we're going to take a look at some of those. We will talk about sexting, and it's sexting is one of those issues that really nobody really wants to talk about. But if you're a school administrator, if you're a teacher, you know these things are going on. But if you're a parent, sometimes we don't want to think that our children are involved. Hey, there's some good news here, though. The overwhelming majority of kids aren't actively involved in doing that. But it has been a statistic that has been increasing and increasing over the years. Then a lot of what we do, what kids do on their devices, they will be judged by people that have never met them based off of what they've done on social media. And we'll take kind of a hard look at that today as well. Another thing a lot of us don't like to talk about, parents don't really want to broach the issue with their kids, is the impact of porn on this generation. And never before has there been a generation that's had as much access to pornography as this current generation. We'll talk about privacy. Now, this is something that impacts everybody. If you're listening to this, you're using technology, and more than likely you're giving up a little bit of your privacy as a result. We'll show you some of the ways that the things that you do on social media can be intercepted and used against you. And of course, mental health. This whole program started as a result of me learning of a young woman who had her entire future ahead of her, taking her life. And in great part, not in totality, but in great part, she took her life because of the misuse of technology and a lot of the bullying that went on as a result of that. So we'll be spending time talking about mental health. We'll be talking about some of the things we can do to kind of minimize that impact on a child. So let's take a look at some of the apps teens are using. Well, all in all, there are about 1.8 billion apps. There are a little bit more on Android devices, a little bit less on iOS or Apple devices. But each one of them, basically, is a neighborhood to your child. We'll talk about neighborhoods. You know, we're used to that concrete neighborhood, our buddy up the street, right, our friend from school. You walk together to school, you ride the bus. In this particular case, every app that your child uses is a digital neighborhood and probably has more impact on them in many cases than the physical neighborhood in which you grew up. So we surveyed 2,500 children between the ages of 13 and 18 about 18 months ago to find out what their top apps were. Now, look, I know 18 months ago is an eternity in this generation because apps are constantly turning. But I think these are still pretty close to what they were back at the end of 2018 and the beginning of 2019. So the number one app is YouTube, but close behind it is Netflix, and sometimes in some schools and in some ages, if you slice and dice it by age and sex, sometimes Netflix will even be number one. Third is Instagram, which has been around for some time. Then Snapchat, which sometimes trades places with Instagram. And then you've got Twitter. And Twitter, at least during our survey, tended to be more high school boys than it was high school girls or middle school boys and girls. And then there were three other to kind of round out the top 8, and that is VSCO, Spotify, and Fortnite. And VSCO and Spotify tended to be more girls than boys. And Fortnite tended to be more middle school boys. But Fortnite was so big among middle school boys that if you just looked at Fortnite and you compared it to all other video games, Fortnite was bigger than all the other combined, at least in the 2,500 that we surveyed. But there's one thing that they all have in common. Every one of them's got in common, and I call it RAS. Records, analyzes, and sells everything that you do. Who you are, where you are, with whom you're communicating, all of those types of things are bought and sold on a daily basis. Recorded, analyzed, and sold. That's not necessarily specific to you, but it can be specific to you. Sometimes you're put in a cohort group and sold. But you have to understand, everything is recorded, analyzed, and sold. And sometimes that specific information about you gets out. And I'll show you an example a little bit later on in our program. Then you have the whole issue of these apps sometimes become addictive. And why are they addictive? Because in order for an app developer to make money, you or your child has to be on that app a certain amount of time every day. We've been using 30, 45 minutes as kind of a rough estimate. So let's just say you're on Instagram or your child's on Instagram. They've got to be on that app every single day for 30 minutes. And everything that they do on that app, it's recorded, it's analyzed, and sold. Look, these guys, I should say, these developers have these apps in these enormous vacuous data centers that cost a lot of money to run. Right? So they're computers that are warehoused in these data centers. They're chewing up bandwidth, they're chewing up power and air conditioning, all those types of things. And as a result, they're very expensive to run, and they need to find a way to keep you there, helping them make money by taking your collective information and selling it on a daily basis. So, for example, Fortnite. This happened, I think it was last June. Epic Games, which developed Fortnite, they were being sued by a group of parents because the parents found out that, hey, they had hired, Epic Games had hired psychologists to help create the games. Well, of course they have. They all have. Same thing kind of happens out in Las Vegas as well with slot machines, right? Psychologists, behavioralists are there to help the developer of that particular app keep an individual on that app as long as possible. It's not that they're mean, horrible, decadent people, but they are business people, and that is the part of the business model behind every app. So you have to understand it. Hey, for me, I'm an old guy. You guys maybe not so old. Your brains are already fully developed. Those constant hits of dopamine and cortisol, basically, that you get when you play these games and when you're on social media, it's probably not going to impact your brain that badly. Your brain is fully developed. A child's brain is not fully developed, and some say you have to be 25 years old or thereabouts before your brain is. But imagine these brains, these little kids, brains constantly being hit by dopamine, cortisol. That is one of my greatest concerns about social media and video games. So, for example, with Instagram, you might go on vacation, take a beautiful picture, you put it up on social media, you think you've never looked better, the background never looked better, the air is beautiful, the sunset's wonderful, you think you're going to get 100 likes on that photograph within the first 10, 15 minutes. But the reality is, you come back, you check, you only have 10, you come back maybe 15 minutes later, now you're up to 20. You do this over a period of maybe 2, 3, 4 hours. You come back at the end of 4 hours, now you got 100 likes. Well, the reality is you had 100 likes, maybe in the first 10 minutes, but they held them back until you were using your quota of time on that app, in this case, Instagram. And once you got there, then they showed you all of the likes that you got. That's the business model of social media. So again, I go back to what I was saying before. Our brains are fully developed. A child's brains aren't. And some suggest, there have been some studies have been done, that if you look at a child's brain when they are in the midst of using social media or video games, you can see some inherent changes. The good news is that if you get there early enough, you give the child a respite from that technology, and that they can be healed again. So how many hours are spent on screens with teenagers and tweens? I think you might be a little surprised by this. I know I was. So this was presented on CNN.com. U.S. teens use more than 7 hours a day on average, and that's not including schoolwork. But then you had Common Sense Media come back with stats even higher than that, 9 hours a day. And I got to tell you, the survey that we did, ours didn't show quite 9 hours a day. It was about 4 to 5 hours a day. But look, the reality is it's difficult for kids to really judge how many hours they've been online, haven't been online. And I will tell you this, sometimes the screen time calculator that's built into some of these devices don't do the greatest job of necessarily calculating exactly how long kids have been online. But this gives you a little snapshot anyway of about what kids are doing when it comes to the use of technology. How many hours should you be on there a day? Well, Dr. Jean Twenge from San Diego State, who wrote a book called iGen, and incidentally, I read it, fascinating book. She believes, after all the research she's done and all the research that she's read, that about 2 hours a day is the limit, whether you're talking about video games or whether you're talking about social media or whether you're talking about just texting back and forth, you're doing Zoom, you're doing FaceTime, right? About 2 hours a day for children. Then we have this whole issue, which nobody really seems to talk about, which drives me kind of crazy, and that is apps and social engineering. We look at an app sometimes and we think, that's just an app, it's for entertainment. And in some cases it is. It's just an app and it's for entertainment. But sometimes it's much more than that. And I will use an app like TikTok as an example, where there's the opportunity for true social engineering, changing the hearts and minds of a generation. And so here's Dr. Richard Harknett, who is a professor of political science at the University of Cincinnati. He also does an awful lot of work with the government in this area. Here's some of his thoughts about social engineering. Richard, I've written a couple of articles and videos related to TikTok and other apps and the impact of what we call social engineering on kids and basically on the Western world. Can you address social engineering and its impact on a country like the United States?
So most of our social media has some component of what would fall under the category of social engineering. In its most benign form, it's called marketing, right? We're trying to sell to the user things that the user would like. But there's a form of social engineering that tries to use the data of your behavior to anticipate that behavior. And in fact, wind up taking choice away from you because it can anticipate your likes before you even know that you're going to like something and force, essentially, you down a certain pathway, right?
Right.
So while it looks like we're making clicks and choices and everything, the information that's flowing to you is actually being controlled. So if you connect that then to an authoritarian government that doesn't actually want the United States to be a leading state in the world, then you can start to piece together a strategy that seeks to undermine the United States. And you could argue, wait a second, a social media app is going to somehow undermine US national power? Well, ultimately, if they're collecting data on people, not only what they like, but what divides us, and these algorithms get very, very good at sort of discerning what makes us not only happy, but can make us angry, sad, right, and provoke discord.
I mentioned earlier about neighborhoods. Your child's digital neighborhood, they basically have access to the world. Their neighborhood is Hollywood. Their neighborhood is the hip hop movement. Their neighborhood is New York. Their neighborhood is Europe. It's Asia. It's anywhere that app can take them. And I think that's one of the things which is so often missed in all of the use of apps. We think sometimes these things are very cute and benign, and oftentimes they are cute and benign, no question about it. But we have to look at an app as a neighborhood. Your neighborhood, nice concrete neighborhood, brick and mortar houses, tree-lined streets maybe, right? Maybe there's a beach or a lake nearby, right? Wonderful things. And it might still be true today. But in addition to that, your child's neighborhood is whatever app they're using and the people with whom they're communicating, the things that they're looking at. And again, you go back to algorithms. Algorithms often push to your child or push to you those things sometimes that you're interested in, but sometimes it's things that the app developer wants you to be interested, or maybe even the rogue state behind it wants you to be interested. A lot of what you're going to see during a presidential election is coming to you by rogue states, right? And sometimes individuals that don't have our best interests at heart. But it's coming to us to make us think one thing, which flies oftentimes in the face of reality. When it's coming to us as adults, that's on us, right? We have to be able to decipher the good from the bad. When it comes to kids, they need us to be able to help them ferret out what's right and what's wrong many times. So let's talk about some of the problem apps. And there are so many of them out there. And please don't think we're going to be able to get through all of this in this webinar. But I also want you to know the majority of kids are doing just fine. Right? They're not necessarily spending a ton of time doing this and doing that, things that you don't want them to do, with one possible exception, which we'll talk about a little bit later when we get into the area of porn. But let's talk about the problem apps. So there are some apps that aren't on parents' radar. We did the survey of 2,500 kids. And it was kind of the good news is there was about 70 apps that those 2,500 kids would admit to using. But as far as what they were using on a regular basis, very few of them were using more than 10. And of those 10, they were only using about between 5 and 8. We kind of talked about that a little bit earlier. But the Wall Street Journal did a nice job talking about some apps that were out there that to them seemed to be recent. The Hoop app really is somewhat recent. I think it's something that came out about the last year, and it was considered to be Tinder for teens. But about 2 years before that, there was an app, which still exists, called Yubo, formerly known as Yellow, which was known as Tinder for teens. So yeah, you look at the success of Tinder in the dating market for adults. Well, these two apps are relatively significant. By no means am I saying the majority of teens and tweens are using Hoop and Yubo, right? Because they're not. But a certain percentage of them are. And for example, just look at Tinder. 7% of the users of Tinder are 13 to 17 years old. Think of that, 13 to 17 years old. So I'm going to say there's maybe 11 to 12% of kids right now, as of this airing, that are using Yubo and are using Hoop, right? And they do have some inherent issues, and we'll only be able to talk a little bit about it, but I encourage you, look up Hoop, look up Yubo, and learn as much as you possibly can about those two. Then there is the Secret Calculator app, right? And Omegle. The Secret Calculator app's been out for a long time, but kind of interesting, in our survey, we found out that 21% of middle school girls, at least in our survey, 21% of them, were using the Secret Calculator app, which hides all of their apps, hides all their photographs, hides all their text messages. And if you don't know that app's on your daughter's phone, you don't know who they're communicating with. You can't see the photographs. And as you'll see here at the end of the presentation, if you're the one that controls that device and its access to the Google Play Store or to the iOS Store, that would not happen. But then there's Omegle, which isn't an app. It's not an app at all. But what it is, it's a website where you're allowed to do video chats. You can do texting and things like that as well. But the biggest concern with Omegle is the fact that who are you communicating with? So this is kind of a look. If you go to for example, the iOS store, and you just type in Vault, because these calculator apps are also called Vault apps. And if you just type that in, do a search, and this is kind of the way that they look. The most popular one is what's called the Secret Calculator app, right? And so the majority of those 21% of middle school girls, they were using the Secret Calculator app, right? Then you have TikTok, right? I do have real concerns about TikTok. So as I created a TikTok account, said I was 24 years old, and then I had to upload a video. So I uploaded a video I did for my grandkids when I was up at Lake Superior with my wife camping. It's me in a Bigfoot costume. And then I used a music cut that TikTok provides. Almost immediately, TikTok suggests that I need to follow this young lady. Now remember, I'm supposed to be 24. This young lady's from Ohio. I'm not showing her face. She actually looked like she was maybe 14, 15 years old. She's dancing rather provocatively to lyrics, which are to the left of the screen there, rather pornographic, right? Why would they suggest a 24-year-old man follow a young girl? And of course, you have a lot of different things that go on in TikTok. There are compilation reels all over YouTube. And this whole dancing provocatively with young ladies, some of them not so young, but a lot of them very young and trying to look older, that's a very real concern. And it goes back to one of the things I was saying earlier about changing the hearts, the minds, and even the morality of a generation. And it can be done when you consider the millions of people that use TikTok. Now, all apps have this particular problem here. Now, TikTok says you hereby grant us an unconditional, irrevocable, non-exclusive, royalty-free, fully transferable, perpetual, worldwide license to use, modify, adapt, reproduce, make derivative work, blah, 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 of anything that you do. So you own it. They can do whatever they want. So the story that was behind that quote there had to do with a young man did something really silly on TikTok. It was really kind of humiliating and embarrassing, but he thought only his buddies could see it. He didn't realize that TikTok could see it, did see it, took it and used it as part of a global marketing campaign. The same thing could be true with any of these apps. You got to remember, you own the rights to it, but you give them the right, the royalty-free ability to use whatever you've done. Incidentally, remember, he had a private account. Makes no difference if you have a private account or not. Then there's Omegle. Their marketing term, talk to strangers, right? Talk to strangers. So again, this is a website, so let's take a look. I did this in real time, and again, what you're going to see might be a little offensive. I tried to block out as much of things that I thought would offend anybody in the audience, but I think you kind of need to at least see how easy it is to see some things online that you shouldn't see. So just type in omegle.com, and then it gives you the terms of use agreement kind of there at the top of the screen. You say you want to go to the unmoderated site. I'm 18, and then you just hit sex, and this is what you begin to see immediately. Some of the things that were on there are so outlandish, but I always say put yourself at the point of view of a 12, 13-year-old boy or girl, and you see these things. Can that impact the way you view sexual relationships, your body, morality? Can that impact you? And I say, yeah, a certain percentage of kids will be impacted by that. Then there's Instagram, which seems everybody has an Instagram account, right? But Instagram is a leading social media platform for child grooming. And they'll meet children there, but then they'll ultimately ask them to go over to a different type of platform. Usually that's an encrypted platform, as you can see right here. My suggestion is kind of part of your homework is go to Vox, vox.com. I'll give you a fair warning. Vox tends to be highly political, but this particular article is not. It's under Recode. And it is how encrypted is your messaging app? And the reality is things like WhatsApp and Dust are highly encrypted. iMessage is highly encrypted, but you actually have to be communicating with somebody else that uses iMessage, right? They all have some form of encryption to them, but oftentimes you have to set that up. What is encryption? It means that if I am in San Diego and you are in New York City and I'm communicating with you across one of these apps, that cannot be intercepted, right? It can't be intercepted and then read, right? So if you're having conversations, particularly if you're in government, for example, and you're having conversations you don't want to be intercepted, you definitely want to use some of those apps, right? So pedophiles start on common apps like Instagram. They'll eventually move on over to something like WhatsApp, or sometimes even iMessage if both of them have iPhones. And so we spoke recently to Rob Sanders about what he sees in his district as Commonwealth Attorney in Kenton County. Are online predators an issue within your district? Have you run into many cases like that?
Yes, we get online predator cases. It's like shooting fish in a barrel. As many police officers as we can get online and get time doing this, because there's not a single police department in my district that has, we have dedicated officers that are trained to do this, but they have other job responsibilities as well. They have other types of cases. They have to be evidence custodians. They have to analyze computers. They've got all these other job descriptions as well. Mm-hmm. Nobody doing it full time. But every time an officer gets online and starts fishing for child predators, they start getting nibbles. They're out there. I don't care where you live, what state, what county, what city you're in, they're out there. They are present in every location you can imagine. They're out there trolling for kids, and they are willing to travel. So even if the predator is not somebody that lives locally, they can drive there or they can fly there, then your child's at risk.
What Rob just said there, relates directly to this video. Now, generally, I don't show a 9-minute video in any of my live presentations, certainly, and I hesitated to show it in this presentation, but I had a conversation with the folks at BARC down in Atlanta yesterday. They gave me permission to show it. It's an incredibly well-done program, and I think you will see over the course of the next 9 minutes the importance of managing and monitoring what's going on in a child's life when it comes to the technology, what's going on in a child's life without regard to technology. Eventually, what goes on technology can and often does lead to a face-to-face confrontation. So at this point, you'll watch the video, and we'll be back in part 2.
I never thought I would be chasing child predators. It was 2 years ago when our team intercepted conversations between a 12-year-old girl and a 40-year-old pedophile. He wasn't just talking to her, he was abusing her, coercing her, collecting images and videos, and no one in her life, her parents, 6th grade teacher, or friends, knew what was happening. I have a 6th grader of my own. I have 3 kids, actually, but you don't have to be a parent to be devastated by this. I work for a tech company that uses artificial intelligence to detect issues like grooming and sexual predation, and this is something we see constantly. These abuses are occurring quietly and mostly go unreported, and we want parents to know exactly what we know about what happens online. So we made a plan.
A man has been arrested for allegedly raping a 15-year-old that he met over Snapchat.
Instagram has become the #1 social media site.
At the top of the free download.
We've also seen firsthand the predatory symbiotic relationship that exists between Instagram and Snapchat.
We would create a fictitious 15-year-old girl, complete with a believable social media identity, put her online, and document how long it would take for a predator to approach her. But creating a person out of thin air is complicated. We needed photos, but we knew we couldn't use an actual teenager. It would have to be someone on our team. I'm 37, but our graphic designers assured me that with the wonders of photo manipulation, they could magically make me look over 2 decades younger. We bought clothes and accessories, studied body language and facial expressions. We methodically covered and edited signs of aging, wrinkles, weight shifts, and stretch marks. Meanwhile, we coordinated with federal, state, and local law enforcement. Then we built a story around her, a history, a family, a social circle. Libby was born in 2004 and is a sophomore who recently moved to Indiana. We created multiple online accounts for Libby, prominently displayed her age, and posted typical teen content. We even created virtual friends for Libby who would comment on her posts. With everything in place, we would launch the project, give it a few months, and see if anyone would buy it. So we hit the button, and Libby went live. Within the first hour of posting on Libby's accounts, 7 adult men contacted her. By the end of 9 days, that number was 92. The conversations ranged in severity from making sexual comments to sharing and requesting explicit photos and videos, to manipulation and threats. The onslaught was so massive, it took 5 of us playing Libby full-time to keep up. We decided to move off-site where we could scale up the operation and gather as much information and evidence as possible. Since Libby is 15, men might try to falsely justify their actions towards her because of her proximity to adulthood. Would parents question, where's the bar? Would a 13-year-old face the same barrage of predators? A 12-year-old? How young could it possibly go? The graphics team transformed me into 11-year-old Bailey. Bailey is afraid of the dark. She hasn't had her first crush yet. She's still prepubescent. A parent might assume Bailey would be insulated from any sort of predatory attack. We launched our 11-year-old persona online.
444 and go. One like from a guy whose profile photo is a penis.
So let's see.
1 minute and 7 seconds. We have a message request.
Although sorry, 2 more requests just came in. How much time? 1 minute and 40 seconds?
Yeah.
How
old are you? You go to the profile, you know that is a child. It also says in the profile that the child is in 6th grade.
Another one.
It's just lighting up, like the inbox is just boom, 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 boom.
An incoming video call in less than 5 minutes.
I can't see you. Don't be shy.
They all say don't be shy.
Few parents know just how dangerous these platforms are for so many kids. So we brought some on site so they could see for themselves. 11-year-old Bailey's persona was approached with an even more disturbing level of manipulation and requests. While the majority of the abuse happened from a distance, our child profiles also received requests to meet up in person, especially our 15-year-old persona. 28-year-old Keith was relentless. Like the others, he took no issue with Libby's age. He shared explicit videos of himself. He treated the virginity of an underage girl as a prize to be stolen. It was a tough decision, but if Keith wanted to meet Libby in person, we would let him. We synced up with our law enforcement contacts, and within 24 hours, we were on the ground and ready to meet. We already had evidence of what he had done online, but was he willing to carry things out in real life? We knew 37-year-old me attempting to pass for 15-year-old Libby would be a challenge. But I would wear a hat, a lot of makeup, and a big sweatshirt, and see if he showed up.
Hey.
How you doing?
Good.
Okay. Is it what you expected?
Well, yeah.
So you going upstairs?
Wait, so do you want to go for a walk first?
Okay. What's wrong? Why you're not trying to rush upstairs?
What was that?
Why you're not trying to rush upstairs?
I don't know. I'm a little nervous.
Now let's go upstairs then. Don't be nervous.
I've never done anything like this before, so I'm a little nervous.
It's the first for everything.
Yeah.
Don't be. I'm not gonna rush you. We just go upstairs until.
Okay. Have you ever?
Wouldn't be shy.
Are you okay with me being 15?
I've never done it.
Oh.
But it's okay. I like to be gentle, make you comfortable. I don't want to just get over the feeling and just, you know what I'm saying?
Are you hungry?
Stop trying to dodge it. Let's go upstairs.
Cyber tips coming in from the National Center for Missing and Exploited.
BARC turns over these potential child predators to the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. Using the app has led to arrests like this one in Florida last year.
The brutal reality is that a predator doesn't have to be in the same room, building, or even country to abuse a child. Libby and Bailey may not be real, but they represent countless children who are being sexually and psychologically abused, both online and in real life. I think about how I would have felt as a young, impressionable child. I would have kept the abuses to myself for fear of being shamed and blamed. I would have suffered with it, secretly and quietly.
Hi, Mama. Hi, did you have a good day?
Yeah. Mama?
Yeah.
I was wondering, so in 2 more days you're gonna come back?
That's right.
Okay. I love you.
I love you too.
Our work has led to numerous arrests, but it's a drop in the bucket. Our work, nor the work of law enforcement or legislation, will ever be able to protect children as well as engaged parents and guardians can. When asked, my advice for parents is to talk to your kids early and often, know what apps they're using and with whom they're communicating. When facing crisis, kids need a soft place to land. Make sure they know they can come to you for help.